Hey, what's going on everybody? It's Coach Matt, EliteThrowsCoaching.com, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking to you about wind and the discus. The one thing I wanted to say about this is that for 99% of people that are out there watching this video right now, you really don't have to worry too much about wind. Really nasty windy conditions are going to have a negative effect on your throws or a positive effect on your throws depending on where it's blowing. But for most of us, we don't really have to worry too much about that. Really, the top level men and the top level women at the high school, collegiate, and the international level, they really have to think about wind. They really have to kind of take into account whether they're in a stadium or whether they're outside and if it's a windy conditions or not. Just the average thrower that's out there or the above average thrower that's out there, unless you're in like super heavy windy conditions, like if you're in Texas and it's just constant 15, 20 mile an hour winds, or if you're by the ocean, constant 15, 20 mile an hour winds, then yes, you have to think about those things. But in reality, it's not going to affect us that much. The average thrower, the above average thrower, you know, the non-elite thrower, which is again 99% of us, we really don't have to worry too much about wind. But might as well, got some questions about it, saw some things posted online about it, might as well talk a little bit about it. Okay, now the biggest misconception about wind is that you actually want a tailwind. This is 100% not true. If you are throwing discus or javelin, you do not want a tailwind. If you can imagine, you throw a discus and the discus is angled up in the air, a tailwind is going to come from behind and actually bat the discus down. So if you're looking at something like this, you throw a discus, it's flying in the air at an angle, it's actually going to get batted down to the ground if there is a tailwind. Ideally, you are going to want more of a headwind. Now, headwind is going to be defined kind of as coming straight at your face. And while yes, that is sort of the best definition of a headwind is when it's coming straight at the circle, depending on if you're right-handed or left-handed, that's not the most ideal. If you are a right-handed thrower, like the example that we have here, when you release that discus, you put a clockwise spin on that discus. So just think if you were spinning a basketball on your finger. If you wanted to get that basketball moving faster, you're going to slap the basketball and keep it going in the same direction that it's already spinning. You're not going to try to spin it the opposite way. It's going to fall right off your finger. Same thing happens here. If you have a clockwise direction, a clockwise spin on that discus, you don't want a headwind that's coming kind of diagonally from the left. What that's going to do is as the rim is spinning, it's going to actually slow the rim down. So the rim itself is going to be hit on this side and it's going to slow down the discus. What you do want as a right-handed thrower, kind of the best type of a headwind, is sort of a diagonal kind of crosswind coming from the right side. So kind of coming down the right sector if you want to think of it that way. Not exactly down the right sector, kind of like in from that right sector. If you can throw into or throw toward that quartering wind that's coming in, it's going to actually help accelerate the rim. It's going to help the discus to move a little bit faster. Just like if you were to spin a basketball and slap the basketball to keep it moving, it's going to be pushing the rim faster on the right. It's the opposite for a lefty. The lefties are going to put a counterclockwise spin on the discus. They want that wind coming in from that left quarter. They don't want the wind coming from the right quarter. But the big thing, the big takeaway from this, headwind good, tailwind very bad. Okay, that's about as much as I want to get into the actual physics. I'm not a physicist. I'm not going to sit here and argue certain things about wind speed and all that stuff. Again, I don't think that really matters too much for 99% of people who are going to be watching this video. If you want to take a very deep dive into this, there are lots of articles that are out there. There are published books or pieces of those books, chapters of those books have to deal with kind of spinning the discus in wind direction and wind velocity, and if it's this fast then it's good, if it's this fast then it's bad. We really don't have to go into that much here. But some other things that you want to consider, again, headwind good, tailwind bad. Just keep that in your brain. The other strategy that a lot of coaches will utilize is that if it is a very windy day, if there are some very windy conditions, then you do want to kind of sometimes try dropping down in rim weight percentage or in that distance rating percentage. So if you are throwing something that say has a 75% rim weight and it is super, super, super windy, then maybe you try dropping down to something that's maybe 70% rim weight. So sometimes dropping rim weight, sometimes going to a little bit lower of a flight of discus is going to kind of help you out a little bit. Again, is that guaranteed? No, of course not, because wind is kind of always changing, but it is a strategy that some coaches have used. Something else that you have to account for is that wind is not predictable. It's wind. Wind is always changing direction. It's swirling, it's blowing, it stops, it's blowing, it stops, it's swirling around, it changes direction. Wind is wind. It's not like a treadmill where it just goes in the same direction all the time. And it's not like it's a fan that's out in the throwing area, in the landing area, that's just constantly blowing in the same direction at the same velocity every single time. That's not the way wind works. It might be super, super windy with the perfect quartering wind for a right-handed thrower when you start your throw, and then by the time you actually finish your throw and release the discus, 1.5 seconds or whatever that takes, the wind might stop. The wind might start swirling. The wind might change direction. So wind is very unpredictable. So you can't put a ton of stock into this where you go, all right, I'm going to wait until the wind is perfect, then I'm going to get in the circle and throw. It's not going to happen. The perfect wind might be when you aren't even on deck. The perfect wind might be in the earlier flight. And then the wind might totally change. The wind might change between your warm-ups and between your competition throws. The wind might totally change direction. It might increase, it might stop. Who knows? That's why we can't really put a ton of stock into wind. There are so many other things that are more important than wind. How fast you can spin the discus, the angle of release, the rim weight or the distance rating of your discus. All of these things are so much more important than having to worry about wind. If you are one of the top throwers in the world or one of the top throwers in your country, then yeah, maybe you have to worry about wind a little bit. But really, for the normal guy, the normal girl, your average kind of or above average high school, college thrower, the non-elite person, you don't really have to worry too much about that. Okay, the last part of this that I want to talk about has to do with a little bit with kind of release angle, arm height, scooping the discus or having more of a flat arm, more parallel to the ground when you release it. Again, I guess in a perfect world, if you had a tailwind, you would want to release a little bit of an angle so that the tailwind will kind of pop it up a little bit. Again, is anyone watching this video really good enough to say, oh, the wind just changed halfway through your throw, and then start to angle the discus and angle your hand a different way? Probably not. If you have a perfect headwind coming perfectly in from 12 o'clock, like bang, right into your face, a nice flat release is probably going to be better. And then if you do have a little bit of that right side, that right quartering wind, releasing the discus so that the wind can kind of catch the discus and push it up and get underneath it, that's probably going to be the best. Again, it's wind, so you can't really predict what's going to happen with the wind. The wind's going to change, it's going to start swirling, all the stuff we just talked about. So yes, if you are a top level thrower, if you are an elite thrower, if you are one of the best throwers in your country, okay, worry about the wind. But there are probably 4 or 5 other things that are way more important than wind and way more important than having to try to figure all this stuff out when you get in the circle. Again, the rim weight, the amount of spin, your form and technique. You know, you can have average, mediocre form and technique and this isn't going to matter one bit, okay? You can have really, really good form and technique, and this isn't going to matter one bit. You know, the release angle of scooping the discus or letting it go a little bit more flat or parallel, guys, all that stuff we don't really have to worry about, okay? I think that's sort of the bottom line to this video. You guys are putting a lot of emphasis on the small things that don't really matter. You're majoring in the minors. And while wind, yes, is kind of important, it's not the main thing to think about. Get confident going in the circle, work your form and technique, improve your form and technique, fix and correct the things that need to be fixed and corrected, get the right discus rim weight for your skill level. You know, make sure you're wearing throwing shoes, not just old basketball sneakers. Things like that are so much more important than wind. So wind, that's sort of a general explanation for you. Headwind good, tailwind bad. If it's windy, go to a lower rim weight discus. Other than that, that's really all that you have to think about.